The sound of a heavy industrial door clicking shut echoed through the empty hallway. A sound so final it felt like the air had been sucked out of the building. I stood in the center of the darkened west wing of St. Jude's Hospital, a section of the facility that had been closed for renovations for over 6 months. My job was simple: walk the perimeter, check the locks, and ensure no copper thieves had broken in through the construction scaffolding. But as the echo of that door died down, I realized the electronic keypad on the exit had been physically smashed from the inside. I wasn't locked out of the wing, I was locked in. And the person who had smashed the keypad was still in here with me, breathing somewhere in the labyrinth of plastic-sheeted doorways and gutted patient rooms. I am not a man who scares easily, but there is something fundamentally wrong with a hospital at 3 a.m. when the power is diverted and the only light comes from the moon filtering through dust-covered windows. I reached for my radio to call the main security desk, but as I pulled it from my belt, I saw the antenna had been snapped off. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a calculated move to isolate me. I looked down at the floor and saw a fresh trail of wet, muddy footprints leading away from the nurse's station and disappearing into the darkness of the intensive care unit. They weren't the prints of a thief. They were the prints of someone walking barefoot in the dead of winter. I didn't turn on my high-powered flashlight. That would be like putting a target on my chest. Instead, I moved to the side of the corridor, pressing my shoulder against the cold, tiled wall and sliding toward the nearest set of double doors. Every time my foot touched a loose piece of debris or a discarded medical chart, the crinkle sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. I could hear a faint, metallic rattling coming from the ventilation shafts above my head. It sounded like someone was dragging a heavy chain through the ducts, a slow and rhythmic scraping that followed me as I moved. "Is someone there?" I whispered, my voice trembling more than I wanted to admit. The scraping stopped instantly. The silence that followed was even worse. It was the silence of something waiting. I ducked into room 402, an old surgical prep room that still had a heavy metal cabinet in the corner. I slipped behind the cabinet, squeezing into a gap barely wide enough for my body. I could smell the faint, sour scent of unwashed skin and old bandages. It was close. It was very close. Suddenly, the heavy swinging doors of the prep room creaked open. A silhouette blocked the faint light from the hallway. It was a tall, skeletal figure, draped in a stolen hospital gown that was several sizes too small. He wasn't carrying a weapon, but his hands were massive, his fingers twitching with a restless, nervous energy. He began to hum a low, distorted tune that sounded like a distorted lullaby. He walked to the center of the room and stopped, his head tilting at an unnatural angle as he listened for my heartbeat. "I can hear you ticking, little clock," he muttered, his voice a dry rasp that sounded like sandpaper on wood. He began to overturn the rusted medical trays, sending scalpels and forceps clattering across the floor. He was playing with me. He knew I was in the room, but he wanted me to feel the walls closing in before he moved for the kill. I saw his shadow grow longer on the wall as he approached the cabinet. My hand brushed against a heavy glass 4 bottle on the floor. I gripped the neck of the bottle, my knuckles white, preparing for the moment he reached around the corner. But he didn't reach for me. He stopped just inches away and began to scratch his fingernails against the metal of the cabinet. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound set my teeth on edge and made my skin crawl. Then he spoke again, his voice dropping to a low, intimate whisper. "Are you under the bed? Are you in the closet? Or are you right behind me?" I didn't wait for him to finish the thought. I knew if I stayed pinned in that corner, I was dead. I shoved the heavy cabinet with every bit of strength in my legs, catching him off guard. The metal groaned as it tilted forward, pinning his arm against the wall. He let out a primal, guttural roar that didn't sound human. I bolted from behind the cabinet, diving through the swinging doors and sprinting down the long, dark corridor toward the construction elevator. I could hear him behind me, his bare feet slapping against the tiles with terrifying speed. He was faster than I was, fueled by a frantic, manic energy. I reached the elevator gates and yanked on the manual lever, but it was stuck. I turned around, my back to the cage, as he emerged from the darkness of the hallway. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, reflecting the moonlight like a predator. He lunged at me, his hands reaching for my throat. I swung the heavy glass 4 bottle with everything I had. It shattered against his shoulder, the impact sending him reeling back toward a stack of drywall sheets. He tripped over a bucket of industrial adhesive and tumbled backward, his head hitting a protruding metal stud with a sickening thud. He didn't move. He just lay there, his chest heaving, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. I didn't check his pulse. I didn't wait for him to get back up. I grabbed a heavy iron pipe from the construction pile and wedged it through the handles of the double doors, locking him inside the ICU wing. I ran to the emergency fire exit, smashed the glass with my elbow, and tumbled out onto the fire escape. The cold night air never felt so good. When the police arrived and searched the wing, they found a nest in the ventilation system. It was filled with stolen patient records, photos of the night staff taken from the lobby, and a collection of sharp objects he had honed into blades. He had been living in the ceiling for months, watching us, waiting for the one night I decided to do the rounds alone. They never found him that night, though. He had disappeared through the same vents he used to stalk me. Now, every time I hear a rattle in the air conditioning at home, I find myself looking up, wondering if he's still listening to my heart tick. The smell of damp earth and rotting vegetation usually felt like life, but at 2 in the morning, under the pale glow of a lunar eclipse, it felt like a grave. I was standing in the center of the Great Glass Conservatory, a sprawling 5-acre botanical garden where I worked as a night technician. The power grid had failed 10 minutes ago, plunging the humid, glass-walled paradise into a world of jagged shadows and silver light. I reached for my radio to call the gatehouse, but the only thing that came through the speaker was a low, rhythmic breathing that definitely didn't belong to the security team. Then, I heard the sound of the heavy iron chains being looped through the handles of the main exit doors. Clink, clink, clink. Someone was locking me inside my own sanctuary. I am a man of science, and I don't believe in the supernatural, but the reality of being hunted is far more terrifying than any ghost story. I knew the man who was out there. It was Julian, a former groundskeeper who had been obsessed with the purity of the rare tropical specimens we kept in the North Wing. He had been fired for sabotaging the irrigation systems of plants he didn't like, and as he left, he told me that the garden needed a human fertilizer to truly thrive. Now, I could see his silhouette through the steam-covered glass of the orchid house. He was holding a long, curved brush hook, a tool used for clearing thick brush, and he was moving with a terrifying, practiced silence. I realized quickly that I couldn't outrun him in a straight line. The paths were made of crushed gravel, and every step I took sounded like a landslide in the quiet of the night. I had to play his game. I had to hide in the very foliage he claimed to love. I stepped off the path, my boots sinking into the soft, mulch-covered beds of the Amazonian fern collection. I crouched low, the giant fronds brushing against my face like cold, wet fingers. Why was he humming that specific tune? It was a nursery rhyme, something about a gardener planting seeds in the dark. I moved deeper into the undergrowth, my heart hammering so hard I feared it would shake the leaves around me. I reached the base of a massive Bodhi tree, its gnarled roots creating natural alcoves of shadow. I slid into a gap between 2 roots, pulling a screen of hanging vines in front of me. Through the gaps in the leaves, I watched the beam of Julian's flashlight sweep across the glass ceiling, reflecting off the panes like a searchlight. He was walking slowly, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel path just 5 feet from where I was huddled. "You're hiding in the ferns, aren't you, Marcus?" Julian whispered, his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. "The Polypodiopsida, they have excellent acoustic properties. They catch the sound of a racing heart and amplify it. I can hear you. I can smell the adrenaline on your skin." He stopped walking, The silence was absolute. I closed my eyes, trying to control my breathing, making it as shallow as possible. I felt a drop of condensation fall from a leaf above and land directly on my eyelid, but I didn't blink. Suddenly, Julian swung the brush hook into the very ferns I had been standing in moments ago. Swish! Thwack! The sharp blade sliced through the thick stems with ease. He was systematic, clearing the vegetation row by row, working his way toward the Bodhi tree. He wasn't just looking for me. He was pruning the garden as he went. I knew I couldn't stay there. If I stayed, he would eventually slice through the vines and find me pinned against the roots like a trapped animal. I noticed the overhead misting system pipes running along the floor. They were made of PVC and were currently empty of water. I reached out and unscrewed a small brass nozzle from the pipe nearest to me. I threw the nozzle as hard as I could toward the far end of the koi pond. Plink! The small metal piece hit the water and sank. Julian spun around instantly, his flashlight cutting through the dark toward the sound. "Found you!" He hissed, and he broke into a dead run toward the pond. This was my only opening. I didn't run for the exit. I knew it was chained. Instead, I ran for the mechanical room located in the basement of the conservatory. I scrambled down the narrow metal stairs, my hands sliding on the cold railing. Once inside, I found the main control board for the fire suppression system. It wasn't just water. It was a high-pressure foam system designed to smother any electrical fire in the facility. I heard Julian's boots hitting the metal stairs above me. He had realized the pond was a distraction. He was coming down, the brush hook clanging against the steps with every stride. I waited until I saw his shadow on the wall, and then I slammed the manual override lever for the north wing. A deafening roar filled the greenhouse as the high-pressure nozzles ignited. Not with water, but with a massive, blinding cloud of thick, white chemical foam. It flooded the north wing and the basement entrance, creating a wall of white that was impossible to see through. Julian stumbled back, blinded and coughing as the foam filled his lungs and coated his eyes. He swung the brush hook wildly, but he had no target. He was lost in a whiteout of my own making. I used the emergency axe near the control board to smash the small, reinforced glass window in the back of the mechanical room. I squeezed through the narrow frame, the glass cutting into my palms, and tumbled out onto the grass outside. I didn't stop to look back at the white-filled glass dome glowing under the moon. I ran to my car, locked the doors, and drove straight to the police station. When they finally cleared the foam and entered the conservatory, they found Julian trapped in the ventilation room. He had tried to climb the ducts to escape the chemicals, but he had become wedged in a narrow turn. He was still holding the brush hook, his eyes wide with a manic, trapped fury. The garden stayed closed for a month for cleaning, but I never went back to finish my shift. Even now, when I walk past a florist or smell the scent of fresh mulch, my hand instinctively reaches for a lock that isn't there. The facility was supposed to be climate-controlled, but the air inside felt like it had been sitting in a tomb for a century. I was standing in the middle of aisle C on the third floor of safekeep storage, surrounded by hundreds of identical corrugated metal doors. It was nearly midnight, and I had come here to find my old birth certificate in a box I hadn't touched in years. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed with a sickly, yellow buzz that made my eyes ache. I felt a sudden, sharp chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I looked down the long, narrow hallway and saw that the door to Unit 312, the one directly across from mine, was standing wide open. The interior was pitch black, a hollow mouth waiting to swallow the light. I am a person who values logic, so I told myself a tenant had simply forgotten to slide the bolt shut. But then, the main facility lights did exactly what they were programmed to do at midnight. They flickered 3 times and then shut off completely, leaving only the dim, red glow of the battery-powered emergency exit signs at the very end of the corridor. In that sudden transition to darkness, I heard the sound of a bare foot sliding against the polished concrete. It came from inside Unit 312. Someone had been standing in that dark room, watching me go through my boxes for the last 20 minutes. My heart didn't just beat, It thrashed against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't have a flashlight, only the weak, dying glow of my phone screen, which was currently at 4% battery. I stayed perfectly still, my hands still gripping the edge of my own storage door. I didn't want to make a sound, but the heavy metal door was on a spring-loaded track. If I tried to close it and lock myself inside, the screech of the metal would be loud enough to wake the dead. If I ran, I would have to pass Unit 312, and the person inside would only have to reach out a hand to grab me. "I can see your phone, David." A voice whispered from the darkness across the hall. It was a high-pitched, melodic voice that sounded terribly wrong in such a cold, industrial place. It wasn't the voice of a ghost. It was the voice of a man who had spent too much time in total isolation. I didn't answer. I slowly reached into my pocket and silenced my ringer, my fingers shaking so hard I almost dropped the device. The red light of the exit sign cast long, distorted shadows down the hallway, making it look like the walls were closing in. I heard a metallic click, the sound of a padlock being toyed with. The intruder stepped out of Unit 312. I couldn't see his face, only a thin, pale silhouette wearing what looked like several layers of oversized clothing. He was holding a heavy bolt cutter in both hands, the long handles glinting in the faint red light. He started to walk toward the exit sign, which was the only way out of the aisle. He wasn't rushing. He was strolling, dragging the heavy metal tool along the floor. Every time the metal hit a seam in the concrete, the sound echoed through the entire floor. I knew I couldn't stay in the open. I stepped back into my own unit, Unit 315, and moved behind a wall of stacked plastic bins. I crouched down, burying myself behind a mountain of old winter coats and holiday decorations. I could hear his footsteps stopping right outside my door. He knew exactly where I was. He began to slide the metal door of my unit down very slowly. He wasn't locking me out. He was locking himself in with me. The sound of the bolt sliding into place felt like a coffin lid being nailed shut. "It's so quiet in here, isn't it?" he said, his voice now only a few feet away. I could hear him breathing, a heavy, wet sound that suggested he was physically exhausted. He began to move the boxes at the front of the unit, tossing them aside with a violent lack of concern for what was inside. He was digging through my life, searching for the person hidden beneath the layers of memory. I realized then that if I stayed in the back corner, I was a sitting duck. I had to use the layout of the unit to my advantage. My unit was a deep model, 10 feet wide and 20 feet long. I had built a makeshift shelf out of plywood in the center to hold my heavier tools. I crawled under the lowest shelf, pressing my face into the dust-covered floor. I watched his feet through the gap. He was wearing tattered sneakers with the heels stepped down. He moved toward the back, his bolt cutters swinging like a pendulum. As he passed the shelf, his back turned to me. I saw my chance. I didn't have a weapon, but I had a heavy gallon jug of industrial floor wax sitting on the shelf above him. I reached up, my muscles screaming with the effort of being silent, and pushed the jug just enough so that it was balanced on the very edge of the plywood. Then, I picked up a small metal screwdriver from the floor and threw it toward the front door of the unit. The screwdriver hit the metal door with a loud ping. The intruder spun around, startled by the noise, and as he moved, the vibration caused the heavy jug of wax to tumble from the shelf. It hit him squarely on the shoulder and head, the heavy liquid bursting open and coating the floor in a slick, chemical mess. He let out a yell of pain and surprise, slipping on the wax and falling hard onto the concrete. I didn't wait to see if he was unconscious. I scrambled out from under the shelf, sliding through the wax myself, and reached the front door. My hands were covered in the slippery fluid, and I struggled to grip the sliding bolt. I could hear him behind me, growling as he tried to find his footing on the treacherous floor. "You, little brat," he hissed, his voice filled with a new, sharp venom. Finally, the bolt gave way. I threw the door up with a deafening roar of metal on metal and sprinted into the hallway. I didn't go for the elevator. I knew he could cut the power or trap me inside the small car. I ran for the fire stairs, my heart feeling like it was going to burst through my skin. I flew down the 3 flights of stairs, burst through the alarmed emergency exit, and didn't stop until I saw the blue and red lights of a police cruiser patrolling the nearby shopping center. The police found the man still in my unit, trying to wash the wax out of his eyes with a bottle of old soda he found in my trash. He had been living in Unit 312 for 4 months, watching the tenants come and go, picking the ones who came alone at night. They found a collection of keys and IDs in his unit that didn't belong to him. I moved my things to a different facility the next day, but I never go there after the sun sets. I still have nightmares about that red exit light and the sound of someone sliding the bolt shut from the inside.